This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The death toll of Saturday's attack in Nigeria's town of Maiduguri rises to 110. The TPLF claims to have shot down a military plane, even as Addis says it has launched a manhunt for its leaders. And the World Health Organization warns that COVID-19 may reverse gains on malaria control. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, the Nigerian government is optimistic the current recession will be short-lived. And in sports, we look at how Zamalek missed out on a 6th CAF Champions League title despite a great campaign. We begin in Nigeria, where the UN says at least 110 civilians were killed in a militant attack. They were harvesting their fields when militants launched the attack. 43 of the farmers have been buried by their loved ones. Several rural communities near the capital of Borno State were attacked. No group has taken responsibility for the killings, and both Boko Haram and its splinter faction ISWAP operate in northern Nigeria's Borno State and its capital Maiduguri. Let's take a listen to an eyewitness account on the aftermath of the account.
On Saturday, 6 of us who were hiding in the bush headed back into the village and split ourselves into 2. 3 of us followed the raised part of the path, while the other 2 and myself followed the lower path. We were shocked as we reached them. We found their corpses, and that was where the main killings took place. So we changed our route and went through a nearby village called Gudo. There, we met so many people fleeing from our village without knowing where they were going to.
In the Sudan, the Rakuba refugee camp has come back to life. This is the camp that hosted refugees from Ethiopia who are fleeing conflict and a famine that killed over 1 million locals over 3 decades ago. As CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy reports, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says it is worried about the situation in Ethiopia as lack of access to internally displaced persons persists.
A few weeks ago, this town was a desert outpost on the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. But to both Sudan and Ethiopia, Rakuba refugee camp holds memories of a troubled past for residents of Tigray. Between 1983 and 85, Ethiopia was in the midst of a conflict and a raging famine that killed over 1 million residents of Tigray. Many fled into this camp as a world that had too much food to waste, while the people of Ethiopia died in numbers, united in guilt. Lots of charity events were held as funds were raised to mitigate the hunger. Now, 20 years after closure, Rakuba refugee camp is back to life. Another conflict is raging once again in Tigray, and more refugees have been arriving here. The UN estimates that over 44,000 Ethiopians have crossed into Sudan. However, most of them are being held in transit camps, but slightly over 9,000 are already settling in this camp.
Up until now, there are over 9,000 refugees. There is not enough water in the camp. We are in need of more, and also in need of sanitary infrastructure.
UNHCR and other aid agencies are setting up amenities for the refugees. Makeshift learning places are also being factored in as children of school-going age continue arriving.
Behind me, there's the first 5 of the classrooms on another site in the camp. We have another 5. There'll be 2 shifts of about 40 students each. So in this initial phase, we'll just help 800 people.
Meanwhile, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says the lack of access to Tigray could be dangerous for internally displaced persons in northern Ethiopia.
I'm also very worried about the situation inside Ethiopia on 2 accounts in particular. One, which I share with other humanitarian organizations. We still have no access to all the people that we used to assist before and to people freshly displaced by the fighting. And I want to renew here the appeal that we humanitarians have made to the federal authorities of Ethiopia to grant us that access, because people are in need and we need to collect information and to provide assistance to them.
The UNHCR boss also said the body has appealed for $147 million to help sustain Ethiopian refugees for the next 6 months. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
The International Red Cross says hospitals in Mekelle are struggling to care for the wounded, with medical supplies running low.
In Mekelle visited one of the major hospitals in the city on Saturday, and what they found was a pretty dire picture. On Saturday, the team at the hospital estimated that about 80% of patients there were suffering from trauma injuries. And it was this influx of the injured that basically forced the hospital to suspend many of its other services to care for chronic medical conditions, to really dedicate what resources they have on providing emergency and life-saving assistance. But probably what's most alarming is the fact that this hospital seems to be running very dangerously low on medical supplies. And when I say medical supplies, I mean really basic things like having gloves, antibiotics, painkillers, drugs that are really important for surgery for trauma wounds, like anticoagulants, which help with blood clotting and to stop with bleeding. And our fear is that if hospitals like this one don't get medical supplies soon, they could be soon unable to care for the injured, let alone the many other chronic health issues that haven't gone away because there is now fighting. These are trauma injuries, so these would be wounds connected to fighting on Saturday, and a lot of them would require surgical care. I guess another point to bring up in terms of a need we found is the hospital is also low on really basic things like food as well. Patients now that would be recovering from post-op care would have a very nutritionally limited diet, which also isn't good for their recovery. So while the situation in the city was calm yesterday and it seems to be calm today, our teams are able to move around. I think what we saw on Saturday is probably indicative of a wider need of hospitals and healthcare facilities around the region. This is something that we also saw in North Amhara a couple of weeks ago in hospitals and healthcare facilities that received injured people in that very first week of fighting. They too were running low on medical supplies, and we were thankfully able to get them some help, and we very much hope to be able to do the same for Mekelle soon.
Crystal Wales, the Africa spokesperson for the ICRC, speaking about the situation. Malarial deaths are projected to exceed those of COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa. In its report on Monday, the World Health Organization says funding shortfalls and disruptions because of COVID-19 have interrupted malaria treatment. More than 409,000 people globally, most of them children, were killed by malaria in 2019. The report also urges partners to scale up the fight against malaria with better mitigation mechanisms. The World Health Organization report found that in 2019, malarial cases globally numbered over 220 million, an annual estimate that has remained virtually unchanged over the last 4 years. Last year, the disease claimed about over 400,000 lives. Well, let's get more on this now and speak to Dr. Akpaka Kalu, who leads the team DOR Tropical and Vector-Borne Diseases Program at the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa. He's joining me from Brazzaville in Congo. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kalu. Can you give us more details on that report?
Thank you very much. The 2020 World Malaria Report, which is based on data from countries, malaria endemic countries all over the world for 2019. For us, it's an extraordinary report. It's a look back on 20 years since the Abuja Declaration on rollback malaria. And we find that extraordinary progress has been made thanks to the leadership of countries, the work of health workers, households, and families. In the WHO Regional Office for Africa, for instance, about 1.2 billion cases have been prevented and 7 million deaths averted between 2000 and 2019. That is an extraordinary achievement. So for us, the report is a celebration of success. But then we also know that the report is a red flag on what is not being done well. We know that the rate of progress towards the 2030 SDG targets for malaria is slowing down and will not achieve the target unless we do things differently.
If you look at those numbers, though, Dr. Akpaku, they are quite alarming because that 2019 report also found that malaria cases globally numbered over 220 million, and that over the last 4 years, last year, the disease claimed over 400,000 lives. So what really can be done to change that trajectory?
It's time to listen to operators at the community level, at the national level. It is time to ask ourselves, what do we do differently to ensure that we catch up and continue with progression towards the 2030 targets? We think it is time to integrate malaria control with health systems work. It's also time to go comprehensive, meaning we should not just focus on malaria technical issues, ensure the treatment is there, the diagnosis is there, ensure that nets are there, spraying of households, using appropriate insecticides are there. That is important. But more importantly, we need to ensure that the health system is effective and is able to deliver appropriate services to those that need them and where they need them. We also need to address the social and economic determinants of malaria. For instance, when you launch a new irrigation project, we need to know that that irrigation project will change the ecology of the environment. And then what it means is that it might potentiate malaria vector breeding, mosquito breeding. Therefore, upfront, we need to ensure that mitigation measures are part of the irrigation project. So we need to work with all strata of society, health sector and non-health sector, to be able to address the malaria scourge, especially in Africa.
All right. Dr. Akpaka Kalu joining us there from Congo or Brazzaville with that update on the malaria report. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live. We'll bring you more news after this break.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Well, let's return to our headline story where the UN says at least 110 civilians were killed in Nigeria in a militant attack. They were harvesting their fields when militants launched the attack. 43 of the farmers have been buried by their loved ones. Several rural communities near the capital of Borno State were attacked. No group has so far taken responsibility for the killings, but both Boko Haram and its splinter faction ISWAP operate in northern Nigeria's Borno State and its capital Maiduguri. Well, let's get more on this story now, because even though no one has claimed responsibility for that attack, we do know that two groups, Boko Haram and the Islamic State of West African Province, are active in that region. In the past, both groups have carried out massacres in the region. Let's now bring in Patrick Agwambu, a security consultant. He's joining us from Lagos. Thank you for joining us, Patrick. This is one of the worst attacks to be carried out on civilians in Maiduguri since the Boko Haram insurgency began over a decade ago. Why now?
Yeah, why now is actually a very sad situation. It calls for a very drastic measure to be taken. But why now? It's you can't wish off terrorist attacks. They've been on and changing tactics. You know, this is an asymmetric warfare. They try to change their mode and their style of operation. Because the Nigerian military have been able to downgrade them substantially, they now target on soft targets, attacking civilians who they think are harmless, who cannot fight back. Just to make statements and to state that they are still active to fight, and that is it. It's how it will happen once in a while. For some time now, we have not witnessed this, and just like you said, it's one of the saddest and most disturbing incidents. But we need to look at what could have caused it, because I have been following up the situation since it happened to find out what really happened in that incident. For years now, the Borno State has not had their local government elections, and so there was preparation for the local government election, which held on Saturday. And because there were threats that there's likelihood of Boko Haram disturbing the elections or stopping the election, security agencies got that intelligence information and decided to draw out a plan to be able to ward off attacks or disturbance for the elections. And one of the strategies deployed was the restriction of movement.
Right.
It was circulated that there will not be vehicular movement within the Borno State in total. And for your information, this is the first time election will be holding in the 26 local governments of that state. And so the security agencies say there won't be vehicular movement. So people are expected to go to the place, to the
right.
voting point that is closest to their residence where they are registered. And so, in this style, the community, there were some communities some farmers, artisan farmers who came from various states of the country, not just in Borno State, but from Zamfara, Sokoto State, Kebbi State, to work in the farmland. And instead of obeying the instructions and the direction of the security agencies, their organizer moved them overnight on Friday to the farm, so that on Saturday they will be working. And so information got to Boko Haram. And of course, when this was being done, they did not notify the security agencies. And so sadly, they were attacked early morning of Saturday.
So I want to find out from you, Patrick, because the Nigerian army has so far been claiming victory over insurgents, yet they continue to target civilians. In fact, at the beginning of this administration, there was talk of, concluding the insurgency in about 100 days. Are the security forces losing the war?
No, I will categorically answer no. Insurgency and terrorism is a long fight. It's not as simple as identifying your enemy and fighting with your enemy and winning. It goes further than that. If you check the world record, the world over, all the countries that are witnessing insurgency and terrorism attack, you find out that these insurgents or these terrorists change their style and attacks, and they come and attack for many years. If you cast your mind back to the IRA, they keep on fighting and striking once in a while until recently when there was a seeming understanding with the government of Ireland, and so it stopped. If you go to Argentina, you notice that they still have the issues. We'll talk about Afghanistan and all that. So insurgency and terrorism war continue because these people keep on re-strategizing. And as we speak, the victory that the Nigerian army or the Nigerian military would say to have gotten is that people can move around. Substantial territories, substantial area in Borno State and the whole northeast.
We'll leave it there for the moment, Patrick Ogambo, but thank you very much for joining us with that update from Lagos in Nigeria. And staying with security matters now, terrorism attacks in Somalia continue undermining government efforts of realizing national security. The country has been ranked among the world's most dangerous places, according to the Global Terrorism Index. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has more from Mogadishu.
Somalia has been ranked 5th among countries with the highest impact from terrorism. According to the annual Global Terrorism Index, the Horn of Africa nation has an active insurgency, with both Al-Qaeda and ISIL competing for dominance in the region. However, despite recent suicide attacks in the capital, the report notes a steady decline in the number of attacks compared to previous years. Terrorism-related deaths fell to their lowest level for the first time since 2013, with 88% of the attacks carried out by militant group Al-Shabaab.
Al-Shabaab has carried out fewer and fewer major attacks in Mogadishu and in Somalia. The death rate as a result of the terrorist attacks have been reduced in the last few years. In terms of overall terrorism in Somalia, we are seeing real and tangible gradual reductions of terrorism attacks.
A suicide attack at an ice cream parlor on Friday killed 8 people near the country's main airport, days after a similar attack killed 5 at a restaurant near a police academy in Mogadishu. Nevertheless, security experts say the terrorist group has been weakened militarily.
Since last year, we have been undertaking operations in Lower Shabelle, removing Al-Shabaab from strategic locations and disrupting Al-Shabaab's ability to organize, plan, and execute operations. So we have been after them. In terms of overall impact of terrorism, we are seeing real and gradual reductions of violence.
The Global Terrorism Index also notes that 44% of the attacks took place in Mogadishu. The deadliest one targeted this checkpoint on the outskirts of the city, killing 84 people. Civilians continue to bear the brunt of the conflict in Somalia, while accounting for more than half of all the victims killed in the past year. Attacks on government targets and security personnel accounted for 20%. Mogadishu says it has initiated a series of reforms as it seeks to strengthen its capability, but continue to face setbacks as it plans to take full security ownership from the African Union force AMISOM.
We have been, of course, crippled by the sanctions in terms of getting sophisticated weaponry against Al-Shabaab. So our security forces are not able to receive the necessary weapons to fight against Al-Shabaab. And these sanctions have been in place in Somalia for since 1992. So we call on the international community and partners, especially the Security Council, to lift the sanctions against Somalia so that we have security forces that are capable and responsible in order to fight against Al-Shabaab.
An increase in US drone strikes has allowed the National Army to make inroads in militant strongholds. But a recent announcement by the US government to withdraw troops from Somalia will likely impact security progress and gains made in recent years. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
The Egyptian government has been sending warnings about a second wave of COVID-19 infections. It is expecting significantly more infections than in the first wave. State health facilities are bracing for an influx of patients. Here's Adel Mahroui with more.
Egypt's COVID-19 daily new cases reached a 4-month high this week. The uptick reported by the health ministry is around 360 new cases a day. But the trend shows that the infection rates are picking up.
We are expecting bigger numbers, and it is a seriously alarming red flag message for all the people and also for the medical teams for being more prepared for the second wave. National preparedness is at its height. Whether it is in the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Higher Education, for university hospitals, for all hospitals, even in the private sector.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and his cabinet members are warning about the gravity of the second wave. The government, however, is trying to avoid going into a second lockdown. So it's depending on public awareness and compliance with safety measures, especially in schools and universities, where more than half of the Egyptian population are. Students listen to personal preventive measures regulations almost daily.
People are more knowledgeable, they have the information, they know how to protect themselves, and we are into their attitudes and changing of behavior to the better for their own protection. Number two, we have the clinical practice guidelines issued by the scientific bodies for which all the physicians and the medical teams have been prepared. We did have a webinar that discussed the newest clinical practice guidelines.
This massive knowledge-sharing effort has helped in reducing the disease's mortality rate in Egypt, boosting the nation's defense against the coronavirus until vaccines become available. Egypt doesn't do mass testing and is no longer conducting community surveillance. The government understands that the actual COVID-19 figures are much higher than those officially reported. And as the country braces for the second wave of the pandemic, the government is doing its best to at least ensure that it can accommodate anyone with severe symptoms. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Kenya's health minister has said it is not sustainable for insurance companies to cover COVID-19. Currently, some providers do cover costs at designated government facilities. But as CGTN's Enoch Sikolia reports, many patients are left with huge hospital bills.
Benson Musungu was insured when he first entered the emergency room. Doctors at Aga Khan Hospital in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, thought he had pneumonia. After 3 days of hospitalization, he received a COVID-19 diagnosis and his situation changed.
They told me that because it was an epidemic, epidemics are never covered across the world. And you see, I went there not knowing that I'm going to use my money, because I knew I was going to do it, to use a cover. But the cover now has been withdrawn. Now I'm on my own.
15 days in the ICU had left him with a hefty bill, all to be paid out of pocket. By the time he was recovering, the total was over $22,000. The cost of protecting doctors, nurses, nutritionists, and cleaners was passed on to him. Musungu says he had to pay $270 per day just for PPEs.
And that is nothing to do with medication. It's about protecting the person who is coming to see a COVID patient. And that is only the PPEs. Now, we go to oxygen. Oxygen at Aga Khan per hour is 300 Kenya shillings. That's $3. $3 by 24 hours. Then times this 15 days I was in hospital. Yes, in the ICU. So you can tell me how much that is.
Dr. Ahmed Omar, the Deputy Director at the Africa CDC, explains that supportive care is where the accumulation of bills begins.
Supportive treatment will require special equipment. It requires specialists. It requires different combinations of medications. And all these combinations of medications take time. So you'll find someone in hospital for at least 10 days. Most of them are above 2 weeks. And every day, some procedure or the other is being done. That is what makes it expensive.
With the management of COVID-19 becoming a very expensive affair for a majority of the African population, Africa CDC says African governments can do a lot to help.
Governments can be able to subsidize the costs by one, being the ones who are procuring what is required, because then they procure it at a pooled procurement rate, which is less than out in the private sector. They don't make a profit. So it means what is being passed on to the patient becomes less.
With a second wave of COVID-19 infections making its way through the Kenyan population, Dr. Oma maintains that knowledge and personal responsibility remain the best weapons against the highly contagious virus. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Here's a quick recap of our headlines this hour. The United Nations says at least 110 civilians were killed in a militant attack. They were harvesting their fields when militants launched the attack. 43 of the farmers have been buried by their loved ones. Several rural communities near the capital of Borno State were also attacked. In Ethiopia, local forces of the northern Tigray region say they shot down a military plane and retook a town from the federal troops on Sunday. There was no immediate comment from the government or the military on the claims made by the leader of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Malarial deaths are projected to exceed those of COVID-19 in sub-Saharan Africa. In its report on Monday, the World Health Organization says funding shortfalls and disruptions because of COVID-19 have interrupted malarial treatment. More than 409,000 people globally, most of them babies, were killed by malaria in 2019. Well, that's a look at your headlines. Let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. Nigeria's government is optimistic the current recession will be short-lived.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria is currently grappling with a second recession in less than 5 years. Its last recession was in 2016. This time around, the government says it is optimistic the recession will be short-lived. Here is Deji Badmus with more details on the government's plan.
Even though Nigeria is now in recession, the government has been quick to point out that things could have been much worse if it had not put some measures in place before the recession hit, arguing that the less-than-expected decline of 3.62% in the third quarter GDP clearly shows its economic policies are working and that the recession will be short-lived.
As a result of all the actions taken by the monetary and fiscal authorities, NBS National Bureau of Statistics numbers shows that 18 sectors during the third quarter recorded growth relative to 13 sectors during the second quarter.
Following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country, In the subsequent lockdown, the government had introduced several fiscal initiatives to inject funds into the economy through the country's central bank.
The CBN has disbursed through its participating financial institution the sum of 149 billion naira to 316, almost 317,000 beneficiaries. On the healthcare, approximately 60 billion naira has been disbursed to 60 healthcare projects, whether they are hospitals or they are pharmaceutical companies who are into healthcare and drug manufacturing. On the real sector, we have disbursed 350 billion naira to over 105 real sector projects during this same period. For those that are going to small businesses, poultry, hairdressing, and the rest, brick making, and the rest of them, we have also disbursed over 92 billion naira to more than 27,000 people. For the youth under the Creative Industry Funding Initiative, we've disbursed almost 2.9 billion naira to our youth in the area of fashion, in the area of ICT, software development, in the movie sector, and in the music sector.
All the monies were disbursed as low-interest loans and grants as part of the government's economic sustainable plan to beat the adverse effects of the pandemic. It now says it would continue with the stimulus to get the country out of the current recession.
We are somewhat cautiously optimistic that indeed, if we continue doing what we're doing and do more, that there's a likelihood that we will see some little positive output numbers during the fourth quarter of 2020. But I can say with some level of certainty as well that we are so certain that during the first quarter of 2021, we will exit the recession.
One of the good things for Nigeria is that oil prices are now gradually trending upwards. Analysts say if they continue along that trajectory, the recession would indeed be short-lived.
But to avoid a third recession in the next 2 years, because anything can happen to global economy, government will have to diversify this economy, encourage manufacturing and production, and private sector, there will be that robust partnership so that irrespective of what happens to our economy, our global economy, it will have less impact on our local economy.
For now, a third recession is far from the contemplation of the government. Its priority is to get the economy off the current recession and keep things steady thereafter. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, this year marks the 24th Cairo ICT Trade Show and Fair. There are more than 500 exhibitor companies from over 18 countries in attendance. Yasser Hakim has more.
Cairo ICT is one of the rare big events that have been given the go-ahead this year, in spite of the coronavirus, a reflection of the importance of this fair. Being mainly about IT, communication and technology, it has managed to attract local and international participants.
We are one of the oldest companies in the market in this field. We started in 1979. We are agents to 25 international companies from various sectors. We participate in the fair every year with several of our clients depending on the theme or demand in that year because we guarantee good traffic and marketing opportunities in the fair.
Coronavirus has had its impact on all industries worldwide in 2020, yet the number of exhibitors here has been the same as last year.
The impact of the corona was very strong. At some point, we had zero number of workers. The government intervened to support the economy and has helped us and the whole country pass through this critical period successfully. We faced a lot of challenges this year because of COVID-19. However, we supported the government in giving the green light for the fair, and we have joined in.
IT and telecommunications is one of a few sectors that have seen growth amidst the pandemic.
Just like the corona had its negative effects, it actually benefited the telecom sector, especially with working from home and remote schools. There's been huge growth in wireless communication, technology and internet. It also shows how important this sector is for Egypt. Egyptians never focused on IT and telecom, but now this has changed.
A sector that has acquired a separate hall at the fair for the first time instead of several booths is transportation. Egypt has been undergoing a multi-billion-dollar major overhaul of its public transport, especially the railway and metro system, and it was well represented at the fair.
This is our second project in Egypt. In our first project, we produced 25 new air-conditioned rail cars for the metro line. This year, we are delivering another 32 rail carriages for Line 3 of the metro in Cairo.
The success of Cairo ICT with a high number of participants and visitors is a positive sign of a gradual economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
As South Africa sees a resurgence in coronavirus cases, there's been a silver lining. There's been an unexpected growth in telemedicine or virtual consulting during the COVID-19 lockdown. It protects both patients and doctors from exposure to the virus. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa's coronavirus lockdown sparked the need for telemedicine or remote consulting. Medical aid company Discovery saw demand skyrocket through its Doctor Connect platform 3 years after it was launched. It estimates growth has accelerated at least by 5 years.
What we saw during COVID-19 was multifold increases. For example, the total number of consultations that we did in February 2019, we did those in 1 day in March 2020. It peaked in July. We've noticed that it's come a little bit down from that peak since COVID-19 infection rate has reduced in South Africa a bit, but it actually stays meaningfully higher than we've ever seen before.
Dr. Connect links South Africans to a global network via a smart device. Examinations are done by phone or video link, protecting both patients and doctors.
We very much prefer a video consultation because as a doctor myself, it retains the intimacy between the patient and the doctor. We are now plugging remote devices into these virtual consultation platforms, into the Dr. Connect platform, that allows a doctor to do some of the things that you're used to them doing to you when you're sitting in front of them. So they can look in your ear, they can look in your throat or up your nose, they can listen to your heart sounds.
Just 50% of follow-ups need to be done face-to-face unless surgery or hands-on treatment is required. HIV clinician Dr. Sindiziwe Van Zyl switched to WhatsApp well before the pandemic, and it's been a useful tool through the lockdown.
It is quite risky to come to GP practice or to go to a hospital, and so we're trying to minimize that as we go into our second wave. Obviously, it's not as much money as seeing a patient face to face. So obviously, my income came down, but that was fine for me as long as my patients were at home and they were able to continue with their treatment.
With the second wave gaining momentum, South Africans are still afraid to venture out. Many are also struggling with the uncertainty and isolation, another issue being tackled online.
A lot more corporates and a lot more people wanted talks around mental health. And I'm very open about my journey with depression and mental health. So I did so many webinars around mental health because during COVID-19, that has been a very big issue.
Until a vaccine becomes a common treatment, virtual consults will be safer and more effective than going into a hospital or medical facility where there's still a risk of contracting COVID-19. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We'll look at how a young Kenyan artist uses graffiti to educate on COVID-19.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore.
CGTN. See the difference.
And let's take you to Kenya, where one graffiti artist has been taking it upon himself to sensitize people on COVID-19. Sermon has been urging the public to adhere to the coronavirus regulations through his art. CGTN's Wanja Mungai talks to the artist about the pandemic and his mission to educate.
At a back street in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, 25-year-old Sami Mwangi, aka Someone, has his creative juices flowing. He's a graffiti artist. He picks nondescript spaces like this wall and turns them into canvases of his art.
For this COVID season, I have been doing works based on COVID, simply to sensitize the community about the seriousness of this ailment that is ailing this country right now. So it's more of there's a C, there's an O over here, there's a V, there's an I, and there is a D. And then this one is a representational of the COVID symbol. So the yellow and the green are sensational colors, so they tend to draw attention more quickly to the masses. It has also grown again into more like a job in terms of like I'm being commissioned. I've done so many commissions of graffiti, like hotels, like people's houses.
Someone says he started at the age of 15. With nothing else but curiosity, determination, and a few cans of paint, he fell in love with graffiti.
I had been an artistic child all my life, as I was told by my mom. But by the day I found my neighbor's drawing book, I really got fascinated by the different letters that he was doing. And as a child, you're like, wow, this is really interesting.
The artist says coloring walls was a childhood game that later evolved into a valuable skill. He also adopted word form, which is graffiti that stylizes words.
It took me roughly 7 years to even master even just a bit of it. So for me, graffiti, I started out as a fun kind of hobby, kind of. And then over time, I've actually started diving more into conceptual work.
During the coronavirus pandemic, he's not the only one trying to get the message across.
Images like these have become common in Nairobi. They show how graffiti artists are trying to raise awareness around COVID-19 using their gifts. Wanja Mungai, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. We look at how Zamalek missed out on a 6th CAF Champions League title despite a great campaign.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, after a great run in the just concluded football season, Zamalek of Egypt fell short at the final hurdle, losing in the final of the CAF Champions League against local rivals Al Ahly. Their defeat puzzled fans who are expecting their 6th African title this year. CGTN's Adel Mahroui looks back at the White Knights campaign this year.
The CAF Champions League final saw a strong Zamalek, which for nearly 80 minutes managed to limit Al Ahly's access to their net. Scoring against Al Ahly, however, appeared to be the biggest challenge they had during the game.
Zamalek had a strong ball acquisition, but unfortunately they couldn't translate that into goals. They have wasted so many opportunities. Al Ahly, on the other hand, scored in almost the only 2 opportunities they had.
Al Zamalek had defeated Al Ahly twice this season. They snatched the Egyptian Super Cup title from the Red Devils and defeated them once in the Premier League. Some analysts believe that these 2 matches may have been the reason why Zamalek lost its 6th African title.
I think
Zamalek was overconfident. They thought they can win easily. That had a negative impact on the White Knights. Al Ahly had managed to use that to exhaust the players and score late in the game. Al Ahly lost the last 2 CAF Champions League finals. They also lost the last 2 matches against Zamalek. This created a strong incentive among the players that they must win this time.
After scoring their first goal in the final, Al Ahly switched to defense mode. Putting all their power to score, Zamalek managed to get the equalizer 31 minutes into the game. The White Knights ran out of breath near the end of the game. This is when Al Ahly used their saved energy to press Zamalek, ending the game in their favor. It's been 18 years since the Egyptian white jersey lifted their CAF Champions League trophy. This was their 2nd defeat in the final since. It is definitely a great disappointment for the Egyptian White Knights. Still, they've played great football this season, and they have proved that they're becoming once again the tough foes the Egyptian Red Devils used to face. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Former Senegal international Papa Bouba Diop has passed away following a long illness at the age of 42. Diop was part of the Teranga Lions side that stunned reigning world champions France 1-0 in the opening match of the 2002 World Cup, scoring the only goal of the game to secure one of the biggest shocks in the history of the competition. Senegal ultimately reached the quarter-final of the tournament, with Diop going on to score twice in the West Africans' 3-all group stage draw with Uruguay before they were eventually eliminated by Turkey in the final 8. Ethiopia's Yalemzaf Yehwalo ran the 2nd fastest women's half marathon in history on Sunday, completing the 21.1-kilometer course in New Delhi in 1 hour, 4 minutes and 46 seconds. The 21-year-old, whose previous personal best was 1 hour, 5 minutes, 19 seconds,